Hello and welcome. I'm Stephen Goldberg of Optimus Performance, bringing you practical tips and ideas on leadership, team development, and employee performance in the workplace. And as you can see today, I have a special guest who's going to enlighten us with his wisdom and experience. Mitch Russo, welcome to the platform. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Stephen. Happy to be here with you.
And as you can see, Mitch is a three-time author. Several books. Power Tribes, as he tells me, is his bestseller, most popular. And we're going to talk today about scaling a business and the obstacles to do that, combined with how the importance of leadership plays a big role in business scaling and growth. So, Mitch, maybe give us a short introduction into your background and what brought you to be doing what you're doing today.
Of course. Now, Stephen, you said the word short. That word is not in my vocabulary. Should I do my best anyway at that point? Or is that okay?
Do the best you can.
All right. All right. So, basic basic story is that I was an employee in companies just like most of us are or have been, and I got so frustrated that I had made a decision I wanted to start my own company. This was at the age of about 22. And so I continued to hone my skills as an employee, and I became an expert at particularly one thing, and that's selling. I went to the Dale Carnegie Sales Institute. I aced all of the programs. I then rose to the top of my sales organization. And at the ripe age of 27, I was generating $34,000 a month in commission. And this is back in like 1975, 79. So that was a lot of money then. It's a lot of money now. But what that did is it enabled me and gave me the basis by which I can then finally start my own company, which was my dream. So had an idea. I was noodling around with a friend at breakfast. I showed him the idea. I told him about it. 6 weeks later, he told me, I want to show you something. And I called me up to his little office and opened up his computer. And there it was. He had literally built a prototype of it. And I was enchanted. I said, the only words that I could think of is, well, we could probably sell a couple of those. Do you want to start a company? And he said, yes. So that was my beginning. And that became the Time Slips Corporation, which started with $5,000. Each of us put $5,000 into a bank account, and that was the beginning of the company. We had never had an equity investment. We've had a couple of credit lines and such, but never an equity investment. We grew that to over 8 figures. We sold the company to Sage, a conglomerate out of the UK. And after my earnout, I became the chief operating officer of the US division. Now, the reason I bring all this up is because you mentioned leadership and working with teams and culture, I think is all part of the story that you like to deliver. And all of those things were part of the time slip story. So I had zero experience as an entrepreneur, zero experience as a CEO or a founder, and I had to learn from scratch. So there was no such thing as coaches back then. Never heard that word except in baseball. So I didn't really know where to go for
What
guidance.
year was that?
Well, I started the company in 1975.
Oh,
So,
wow. Yeah.
so it's a long time ago. But what ended up happening is look, with common sense and a good background in retail business, which is where my dad brought me up, um, I I mulled through it and figured it out. And we got to the point where we were running a very large organization, 250,000 customers, 100 employees. And for me, the biggest challenge was not either of the customers or the employees, it was the community. So we had deliberately built the Time Slip Certified Consultant Program, which was a community of 350 very highly motivated enthusiasts about our software who paid us a lot of money every year to stay in that program. And their role was to support people who wanted a higher level of support than they can get on the phone by calling into a call center and waiting 20 minutes to speak to a tech. That was the basis of that entire operation. Now, I didn't know anything about certification. I wasn't even sure what the word meant. All I knew is that we could pretty much create a test, get people to pass it, and call them certified. Well, the first time I did that, I almost crashed the company because I left out a lot of what we now call culture. And so I had to rebuild the culture from scratch. I had to close down the program, restart it, but this time with vision and with culture. So after 18 months, I went from 0 to 350 certified consultants, and I had developed a very powerful model for recurring revenue and for culture creation inside of organizations. That entire process is laid out in my book, Power Tribes. And since then, I've been brought into corporations to help scale and refine their culture. And I've been brought into organizations to help create certification programs as well. So my background was doing all of that, but then I sold the company. And then I went to work for Sage for a couple of miserable years. I hate working for people. And then finally, after I was free, I feel like it was a jail term I had to endure. Um, I ended up out on my own. And that's when my old friend Chet Holmes came knocking on my door. Chet said to me he wants me to help him with his company. And I said I would. And next thing I know, I got Tony Robbins on the phone. Now, Tony, of course, as you know, for me, Tony was a guy who basically recorded CDs and cassette tapes that I used to boost my confidence and help me figure out life earlier in my years. And there he was on the phone with me, and I was a little starstruck, of course. But ultimately, Tony, myself, and Chet built and started a new company together, and that was Business Breakthroughs International. And that company rapidly scaled to nearly 30 million in revenue and about 300 staff people. And then that company was all about doing two things, and that was consulting, coaching, and training, and converting all of those into product lines that we can then use our conversion tools to upsell. So all of this started for me. um, it allowed me to utilize all the skills I had built growing and scaling my own company and then helping venture capital firms fix broken companies, which I did in the interim. And then finally, with Tony, scale Business Breakthroughs International. Short story is when that was over, meaning when Chet died and I backed out after 5 years, I started writing. And I wrote my very first book, which was called The Invisible Organization, which back then was a very relevant book. It was about how to turn brick and mortar companies into virtual companies. So that book became pretty famous and popular at the time. I was on various news outlets and such talking about it. And I'll tell you one funny story. I was being interviewed, and I asked the host. I said, "Do you next time you call JetBlue or any of these major airlines, ask them where they're actually sitting at this very moment?" And she said, "Well, sure, but why would I do that?" I said, "Well, where do you think they're sitting?" And she said, "Well, in a call center like all these other companies." And I said, "Mm-mm, they're probably sitting in their kitchen." She goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Yeah, all of these agents are working from home. They're all connected through a internet, through the web, into a centralized system that routes calls to them, gives them computer access to your back end records, and allows them to help you. And the company doesn't have to pay for a call center. So no insurance, no parking, no
What
building,
year
no
was
heating."
that?
That was in 2018.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not that
So
long ago, but that's been growing ever since.
yeah. Oh, well, I'm sorry. I go back. It was 2016. Sorry. Just,
Okay.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm just saying it wasn't that long ago, but
Yeah.
a lot's changed since then. So
Yeah.
that brings me up pretty much up to speed as a coach. I found that the tools for coaches was inadequate. So pig-headed as I am, I decided to build a whole other software company around coaching tools, tools for coaches. And that has become Clientfolio, which is my software that I use to run my sessions, and now several hundred coaches use it too.
Okay. Very interesting. So, um, as a business scaler, I would say, as an entrepreneur,
Mhm.
you've gone through the trials and tribulations of scaling your, I guess, multiple businesses.
Mhm.
Um, what do you see as the major problems that entrepreneurs face today in terms of being able to scale their business? Because, there's businesses being created every day. If you go to the government stats and how many businesses get started and how many succeed, I don't think it's changed in years. Most don't make it past the first 1 to 5 years. What stands in the way for most entrepreneurs to be able to scale their business?
Well, I mean, as you can imagine, there's probably a different reason for as many people that fail as you can think of. But the core reasons are number one, they're undercapitalized.
Mhm.
Number two, they launched a business without ever testing whether that idea was viable in the marketplace or not. So we have a little test. It's called, does it solve a blood spurting problem? So it's if it does not, then shut it down or find another way or find another problem that it does solve.
Where can
So
we get that test, by the way? It sounds very interesting.
that's a simple test that you have to do in the marketplace.
Okay.
Meaning, let's say you have this great idea for a product for dentists, and you say, you know what, I know dentists are going to love this. I know my brother-in-law's, he's a dentist. I hear him talking about this problem all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. And I invest my money and create this product. But the bottom line is I didn't ask any or many dentists whether they would use it. So I think the first test is this a problem so desperate that people would pay not almost anything, but do whatever it took to solve? That's why it's called the blood spurting problem, right? And so bottom line is that they're not solving blood spurting problems. They are solving problems that they had or think they had. And they may even be unaware of the competitive marketplace. That problem might have been solved a long time ago. They're just not aware of it. So that would be the first thing. Second thing is undercapitalization. When we started Timeslips Corporation, my partner and I had personal war chests of cash from our previous activities. Now, we had predicted that we'd probably go the first year without a salary, and we were wrong. It took 2.5 years before we could take or draw a salary from profits in the company. So if we wouldn't have had that money, number one, um, we obviously wouldn't have been able to continue. Number two, we wouldn't have been able to discover where our sweet spot was. We took $10,000 and we spent 6,000 of that on two ads in PC Magazine. And we figured, according to the ad rep at PC Magazine, he says, "Oh, you'll let me triple that money back." That's what you get for listening to ad reps. Bottom line is that we made 6 sales at $99 a sale, and now we were desperate because that's all the marketing money we had. However, being resourceful, weeks later they delivered a paper envelope to me with what they called bingo leads. Now, I don't know, Stephen, if you remember those cards that used to be in the magazines where you'd circle the number in the card and you send in the card, and the publisher would then send your copy of your card to all the numbers you circle, all the companies that were in that issue, and you'd get like junk mail from each of those companies. Well, I took the trouble to take 500 of those and I looked up their phone numbers and called as many of them as I could reach and asked them why they circled the card, why they circled the number of our ad. Well, I made a couple more sales, but for me, that was our core market research at the time. That's when I discovered that our true market was not going to be found in PC Magazine, but it was going to be lawyers. And so we completely refocused all of our marketing into one vertical market. And that was the key to initial success for us.
Because that's where you saw the problem, what you called uh, what's the expression? The
The blood
bleeding
spurting
problem?
problem, the blood spurting problem. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So here's what happened. We built a time tracking tool and we thought everybody could use it. And
Uh-huh.
everybody can, blah, blah, blah. But who really, I mean, think about who really needs it and what is the promise. Now, we had to make some assumptions, which meant that we had to be able to look into the future just a little bit. So here was our prediction, my prediction. My prediction is that lawyers soon would have computers on their desk. That was a big prediction. Back then, all the computer stuff was in the back office. So every week, a lawyer would write down their timesheets, send them in with their secretary to the back office, who would then compile them into billing statements. But what about those lawyers, those younger lawyers that were catching on that wanted to do it on their own desktop computer? What happens if they had a pop-up timer that looked like a little taxi cab meter that would track their time on phone calls, on tasks, on research, and then with one button compile a bill that they could then send immediately to their clients in mass at the same time if they wanted. That was the key to our quote unquote invention, because conventional software was still back office software. We brought it to the front of the house. And our thinking is that we would get the early adopters in the first year, and we had believed that the personal computer would drop below $1,000 in year two of our business. And we were right. I don't know how, but we predicted that and we were right. And by year two, we had massive adoption. And that was when the company really took off.
So, chasing the right or wrong problem can break you in terms of scaling your business, not having enough capital to uh, ride the initial investment or cost of scaling your business so that it gets to the point where it's profitable enough to keep going, I guess, because obviously the first rule of business, the first need is survival, and
Yes.
you need to be able to do that. So let's take it a step further, and companies that have been able to get over those points, find their
Mhm.
right market, uh, have enough capital. What's the next big hurdle that you see that business owners, leaders face in terms of scaling their business so that it can get to the next level?
Sure. Well, next level is different in many industries. For for us, we hit a ceiling at about 2.5 million. And um, what I had determined, and it was a very, very hard decision, what I had determined is that the management team that got me here can't get me there.
Mhm.
And there was doubling or tripling from where we were. And so I had to make a super hard decision, and I chose to relieve and fire my entire management team
So
all at
hold on a
once.
second. What were the indicators that told you they weren't the right people to take you to the next level in your business?
Well, when a business evolves past the point of the skill level of the participants, then something has to change. And when I saw, I'll give you some specifics, that my marketing director didn't understand really how to market beyond the tools he already had, or that my sales director didn't know how to sell into distribution channels or retail in our case, I realized I just had the wrong team. My CFO at the time was basically a bookkeeper, and she had not known how to prepare proper financials. So I fired my entire C-level staff, brought in a professional CFO, a fractional CFO, brought in a professional vice president of marketing and a professional vice president of sales, and then we accelerated because they already had the connections in the industries I was trying to find. They already knew the people. They already understood how the wheels get greased and how the all the pathways work that I didn't and my own team didn't. Now, to be fair, I hired all the people that I had in our earliest of years when we had budget issues. We had to find people at the lowest possible rates. And if they weren't skilled, we would train them best that we could.
Yeah.
But if you remember me telling you, I wasn't trained. I'm just playing it by ear.
Hmm. So what I hear, and which is something I preach or uh, coach my clients on, is the importance of having the right person in the right job.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Yes.
and and, and it's tempting because we're people and we like other people. It's tempting to keep people longer than we should. So I've always I learned the hard way, and you've probably heard this before, which is to hire slowly and fire quickly. And the reason I had to adhere to that is because when I wanted to fire somebody, sometimes it took me months to get up the to really convince myself that they had to go. And then other times I was desperate, so I had to hire somebody quickly to fill a position. And in both cases, those could be mistakes. And I had to learn that the hard way.
So when you say hire slowly, fire quickly, so what were, some of the key approaches or tactics you used to, as part of that hiring slowly to assess that you were getting the right person, not only just competency wise, but execution, able to execute, able to uh, also manage the people that they needed to to direct.
Well, like I'll give you an example. My business partner was the sole developer of our software when we first started out. But he had never managed anybody before in his life. And we had already scaled the department to, at that time, almost 10 programmers. And he was out of his league. So I started asking around and running some ads and bringing people in. And I found a project development manager from AT&T. He was a gray-haired guy, if you will. He was older than all of us, but had a lot of experience. Um, you know, he wasn't young and agile. He was older and deliberate, and I recognized immediately that he would be an asset. And so I did a series of interviews. I had my partner interview him. I had all of the team interview him. I said to the team, I said, look, we need leadership here. You know that. This is not a secret. They go, oh, yeah, we sure do. I said, well, this is a guy I think that we can work with. What do you think? And it took me over almost 2 months to hire him because I wanted to make sure he got vetted at every level. Then I had to run a credit check and a criminal background check. Then I had to make sure his references checked out. I didn't want someone who was not who they say they were. I mean, all this stuff takes some time. Um, and to give you another example on the other side, we would have salespeople on the team that wouldn't that would eventually couldn't close anymore or started out okay but slowed down and couldn't really close. And we would try to coach them and we would try to bring them along till finally I made up a rule. I said, look, every month we're going to let go of the bottom 10% of the performers. And it's not emotional, it's not personal. It's just that we only must have top performers here at the company. And again, end of the month came. Most of the time, people knew who they were, and they were let go. There was rarely any emotion involved, and we had already had new people lined up, and we learned from our mistakes. Sometimes when we had to let somebody go, we realized, you know what, we did not do a good enough job training them. So we had enhanced and reinforced our training systems. So one of the things I learned that became very, very powerful and important is that you can't overdo training, but you can't train without mixing it with doing. So if you just sat down in front of books and videos and made someone learn something, that would be one thing. But if you continued their training while they're involved in the company, while they're in their job, that changed everything because it gave them valuable experience to try out what they just learned, as opposed to trying to remember something they learned weeks or months ago when they're finally in the position that you trained them for. So we had to learn these things. Maybe that's obvious to you and other smart people, but it
Mm.
wasn't to me. I had to figure it out. And this is what I mean by having to figure it out. My dad built candy stores all over New York. He had no experience scaling a company or dealing with a lot of employees. Um, but I had sensibility. I knew how to sell. I knew what good marketing looked like. I felt like I was an extroverted individual, and I could tell when I could get along with somebody and whether they'd fit into my culture. Later, I had to figure out what culture meant. And that's what I was telling you about earlier. I had to figure out how to define culture. Where does culture start? I had to define that. So I realized later that as the CEO, like it or not, it started with me. It started with my foundational values and my why. So why am I in business? Why did I do this? What is my why? The why that drives me to be who I am. If I don't know that, it's going to be very, very hard to lead others.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The importance of continuous learning. I think that's really especially true today with all the changes that are occurring, uh, just demographically, technology is just, pushing so much change and the importance of adapting. And if people aren't flexible enough, how do you adapt? How do you get your organization to adapt to new technologies and new approaches? Because if you don't, and your competition is, you're going to fall behind, even if you
Absolutely.
have a product, unless you have a monopoly, perhaps. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I mean, and there's a place for that too. We had when I was selling semiconductors, um, and I told you before I was a salesman, I mastered sales as a semiconductor sales rep. And one of the companies that I repped was a custom silicon shop. So what was my job as a salesman? My job was to find companies with research projects that would someday become real scalable products and get their engineers to use my company to create custom integrated circuits that they can embed into their product, save money, save power, save space. And once that happened, I was a sole source for that product. So now no other competitor could come in behind me and say, well, we'll give you the same product at a lower price. Why? Because we just spent 18 months building and testing a custom integrated circuit just for that company's functionality. Now I don't have a competitor. Now I could demand any price I want. And by the same token, I get respect for having done so. That was the lesson I learned. So create an unassailable fortress that nobody can get through if you think it through and do it right. That was kind of the way I thought about it.
create your own monopoly or must go to source to drive your client's business. That's what you're saying, really.
Exactly, exactly. And once again, it serves the client at the same time. If it doesn't, then who am I? I
Yeah,
mean,
we go back to that point about the
blood spurting
stop the
problem.
bleeding.
Yeah, exactly. Without the blood spurting problem, we don't
Blood
have business.
spurting frog. Yeah, yeah. Um, just for a minute, let's go to your book for a second. What
Yeah.
can entrepreneurs, managers, leaders learn from your book that can help them in today's world of business growth, business management, leadership?
Okay, so if you're a business leader now and you're listening to this incredible show, then the question I would ask you is, would you rather pay your sales force or would you rather have them pay you? That's not a trick question. I mean it because they will pay you. They will pay you every single year to sell your product for you. As long as they get a cut of the sale, number one, and number two, the implementation fees required to get it installed and running inside the company. Now, again, I realize this doesn't apply to every possible business, but what's in the book is a way to create communities of people who you can then certify and turn into your free sales force that pays you every year to sell your products. But that's not the best part. The
Like
best
like
part,
Microsoft has done with their softwares and their partners is a good example.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, Salesforce, Microsoft, HubSpot, these they all have a certified partner, certified consultant program. And I would say that few do it fully. They do it well, but they don't do it fully. when I invented this process, we had five recurring revenue streams, and we had a 97% stick rate for everyone who paid year after year after year. The only way that they didn't pay is if they died, it seemed. It was, I mean, people were very loyal to the company. And why? Because we helped them grow their own business. Well, once you care about your partners and you get involved in their life and in their business, that they know you care about them. And inside the book, I revealed the ways I did that. Simple things. Like every time I would get on a plane and travel to a foreign city, I would send in a message to all of my certified consultants in a 200-mile radius and say, look, I'm going to be in Los Angeles. I've reserved a private dining room here at this restaurant. Come join me. Dinner's free. No agenda. Let's just talk. I'd love to hear from you. Well, that turned into a 4-hour session. And at the end of that session, everybody was hugging. I mean, this is the kind of bonds you build if you go outside the scope of traditional business. And that's why I believe so strongly in creating powerful communities. So, another very important advantage of a powerful community is that the culture becomes self-correcting. So, what does that mean? Well, if you ever, I don't know about you, but back in the day when we hired a certified consultant for Infusionsoft, um, it turns out that I had a minute to chat with the guy, and I said, "By the way, what do you think of the company? I mean, how they treat you?" He goes, yeah, they never deliver on what they say, and they hardly send us any leads, and yeah, we just make a living. It's fine. Now, that to me is a poor culture. You'd never heard it. You'd never hear one of my people say that. Why? Because we over delivered everything we promised, and we took responsibility for helping them build their business. What that meant was that meant lead flow, that meant communications, that meant marketing, that meant all the pieces that I knew they wouldn't be strong at because they're consultants. Heck, they love the tech, they love their topic. They don't love marketing or sales. So we help them with that. That is the power of a community. So once you have that, and that happens every year, you can then stack more and more options into that program that will help them and at the same time create more recurring revenue for you. I lay all of this out step by step in my book called Power Tribes.
It's very interesting because I was actually listening to a podcast recently about an expert in society behavior and how important it is to be to feel part of something that resonates with you and how it contributes to both your mental and physical health. And a
Right.
lot of it was talking about a community. It sounds like you developed that understanding and built that into your business, which I think is a really powerful message. Now, I don't know if you could do that for every business, but I think there's some great learnings from that. So I'll put a link. I guess anybody can search for your book, but I'll put a link in the description of the video.
Mhm.
Now, is there anything I should have asked you that you'd like to share that I didn't?
Well, I mean, there's probably nothing that you should have asked me, but I'll share this. Um, what I believe is I believe that every business has more potential than the people who are as close to it as the CEO and the management team. Every single one. What I do when I work with a company is I am basically a forest and trees type of person. I see what they don't. And then I create a system to collect that data and then I prioritize it and help my clients implement it step by step. So I've had clients that the CEO was in their own business for 30 years. And after one or two sessions, the guy said, "How do you know more about my business than I do? I'm in this business 30 years." I said, "I don't. I'm just able to see from everything you've shown me what you're missing." And that to me has been maybe my gift or maybe simply a way anybody can kind of do this. And it's important. You got to have outside perspective when you're thinking about your future because if you don't, you're leaving a lot of money on the table.
So it sounds like what you're recommending and is that every business owner should work with either a coach or a consultant to help them gain a broader outside perspective of their own business so they could identify the blind spots that they're not seeing, which are
Complete.
hindering
Yes,
them to getting to where they could be, their potential, or where they'd like to be.
exactly. Exactly. And
Excellent.
if you're listening now and that's someone you already know, great. If you don't have somebody, speak to Stephen. This is his expertise as well.
Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Mitch, that was great. Mitch, do you have any, besides your books, do you have any other, like a free resource that people can? I thought I saw something on your website at the bottom that
Sure.
you,
So I have a few things that are free. The first thing is you can go to profitstackingsecrets.com, and I prepared a report on 3 free ways to get massive publicity and attention in your market, which you could download for free. So um,
I'll put a
that
link to
is
that also in the description.
okay. Good. Sure. Absolutely. The other thing is if you go to my website, there's a link to get 37 tips and tricks, which is a little dated, but it's actually very interesting. There's still some very good stuff in there. And then finally, if you happen to be a coach, uh, you might as well get my book number 3 for free called Coach Elevation. You could just go to coachelevation.com
Okay.
and that will get you the download for free.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are coaches listening to this.
Great.
Well, that's fantastic. Really enjoyed our conversation, Mitch. You gave some great insight into your own, uh, I guess, business scaling, business growth, and the challenges that you faced and how you were able to succeed. Fantastic. Thank you for joining me. For the audience, thank you for joining us here today and listening. And if you haven't subscribed already, I invite you to do so. Turn on notifications so you get news of new videos and guest expert interviews like this one. Again, thank you, Mitch. Thank you
Thank
to
you, Stephen.
all, and we'll talk again soon.